Jeremy Corbyn, I'm not saying he's the Bernie Sanders of the UK. You're both very, very different politicians in many ways, but he was a very, very popular left leader who galvanised another generation of people. They all came behind him. And he has now been absolutely pushed to the side of British politics to the point where he can't even stand as a Labour candidate in his own constituency. And I wonder what your reflections are on that.
Well, I'm not going to get involved in Labour Party politics here. I don't certainly know enough. But I do know Corbyn. And I think, as you indicated, here's a guy who inspired a lot of younger people for a new vision for society, a lot of working class people, and his willingness to stand up to big money. And I think that is worthy of a lot of respect.
Do you think it's sad that they can't run on the same ticket, he and the current leader?
I don't understand. I really don't, what's going on with Labour Party politics. But it does seem a little bit strange to me that somebody who's been in the Labour Party his entire life, was leader of the party, brought, as I understand it, hundreds of thousands of people into the party, is now told that he can't run. But that's about my knowledge of Labour Party politics.
Well, I'm going to inform you a little bit more, because the current leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has announced today 5 pledges or 5 mission statements for a future Labour government, and they include the fastest growth in the G7, a growth pledge, making Britain a green energy superpower, no surprise there, reforming our National Health Service so that it can survive and prosper in the future, making Britain's streets safe, a crime pledge, and breaking down barriers to opportunity in education and skills. Listening to that, is that enough for a centre-left party?
That's something that politicians all over the world will say. Who's going to disagree with anything? The devil is always in the details. When you talk about GDP growth, that's fine, but who benefits from that growth? Are we talking about that growth trickling down to the middle class and working class of the country, or are the rich going to get richer? That's really the issue. And if you're concerned about growing the working class of this country, seeing people do better economically, what are your specific policies to do that?
In the end, it's about ambition. As you say, it's about ambition on what you would call middle class, we call working class incomes. How central do you think more power, more influence for the trade union movement is?
Look, I'm a strong believer in the trade union movement. I've worked with the trade union movement my whole life. Right now, we're taking on some large corporations who are engaged in terrible union-busting efforts, illegal efforts. So I believe in democracy. And democracy means that working people have got to have power. And one way you have power is through a trade union. That is power on the job to negotiate a decent contract. That means political power as well, when millions of workers come together around an agenda that works for them.
We're going through a period in this country where huge numbers of people are going on strike. Nurses, junior doctors, council workers, right across the board, ambulance workers, again and again, waves and waves of strikes, because, as you said, their incomes have fallen so much, partly because of inflation over the last 10 years. And yet, on the Labour side of the argument, there's a great reluctance of Labour politicians to stand beside them on picket lines and stand beside union members. From your perspective, would you urge people to do that?
All I can tell you is I have been on picket lines for 50 years. The crisis in America right now is that working people are falling further and further behind, and the gap between the people on top and workers is growing wider.
Same here.
And I don't know how you have a political party that stands for anything if they don't stand with the working class of this country. And I suspect in the UK it's not radically different than it is in the United States. People on top are doing very, very well. And I think why so many people get demoralized and alienated from the political process is they see the people on top doing phenomenally well, and they're saying, who is standing with me? Who is worried about the future of my kid, whether I can afford to send my kid to college? Who is worried about whether I can pay the rent? And you need, in my view, political parties in the United States, in the UK, all over the world, who say, you know what, we're prepared to take on powerful special interests. We're going to stand with the working class, with the unions.
One of the other themes in your book, not surprisingly, is a certain Donald Trump. And you make the argument in this book that the struggle against Trump, where you stood shoulder to shoulder with Joe Biden towards the end of that campaign, isn't a normal political struggle. It's actually about the perseverance of American democracy itself. You see Trump as a genuine threat to American democracy.
I can't remember, about a month before Election Day, I gave a speech. And that's just what I said. I said, this is not a normal election. And I have real fears that if Trump loses this election, he will not, for the first time in the history of the United States, leave office peacefully. And that fear ended up being justified when we saw what happened on January 6th. So I think in Trump, uniquely in American politics, you have somebody who does not believe in the rule of law, does not believe in our Constitution, and does not believe in democracy.
What was going through your mind on the day that huge eruption happened at Congress and all those people broke in?
Honest to God, it was disbelief. We have all kinds of protection and security around the U.S. Capitol. It never crossed my mind that it would be conceivable for a mob to literally take over the Capitol and the Senate offices. And, we were escorted out by, military and placed in a room. We were safe and all that. But it was, I don't know what the word is to use it. It was certainly quite unbelievable that occurred. And quite sad for what the United States is supposed to stand for.
Did you ever question your own safety? Did
No.
you think? No, you didn't.
We had guys around us with machine guns, so I wasn't worried about it. But it was a sad day for the country.
Now, clearly, our politics are very different from that. We've got a very different system, but we have gone through in this country an extraordinary, turbulent period in our politics too. We had the Brexit referendum, we had Boris Johnson and all the controversies around him, and then we had the short-lived, quite extreme Liz Truss government, which fell very, very quickly. And I just wonder whether you think that we have been going through a kind of parallel system where there have been politicians, as it were, testing the traditional rules of politics, the traditional
Could be.
rules of
Again, I don't pretend to be an expert on British politics. But I think all over the world, in the United States, I suspect here, France, you had a lot of working class people who really do not believe that the government understands what they're going through and is fighting for their interests. And when that takes place, bad things happen. Democracy becomes threatened. So I think all over the world, what the revitalization of democracy means is people seeing they're talking about issues that are relevant to me. They are doing something to improve my life, and they're not just worrying about the rich and the powerful.
So why is it that in this period they so often turn to the radical right rather than to the left?
Good question. And I think, it depends country by country. But I think a lot of the right-wing demagogues have addressed the anger, recognized the anger that many folks on the left have not. People are angry. When I talk about being angry about capitalism, this is me. That is, you have a right to be angry if your standard of living is in decline while people on top are doing very well. You have a right to be angry if the fossil fuel industry is destroying this planet. And I think a lot of the folks on the left are kind of intellectual. They talk about the issues. And you have Trump coming along, tapping that anger and directing that anger against immigrants, against people of color, against the poor. And I think kind of that's what's happening.
That's what's happening all around the place. Now, one big difference, obviously, between our countries is that we have socialized medicine. We have the NHS. And in your country, you don't. So I wonder what your message might be for all those people in British politics who are suggesting that to keep the NHS, to reform the NHS, we need to introduce much more private money. We introduce charges and private money.
No, look, I don't have the exact statistics in my head, but we probably spend in the United States twice as much per person on health care. We spend $13,000 for every man, woman, and child, an outrageous sum of money. And yet we end up with 85 million people who are uninsured or underinsured, while the insurance companies make billions and billions of dollars. The function of the American healthcare system, something you should not emulate here. The function of the American healthcare system is to make the insurance companies and the drug companies phenomenally rich. The goal should be, and it's not an easy goal, is how in a cost-effective way do you provide quality healthcare to all people as a human right? Not necessarily easy, but that's the goal. And it's a lot less expensive than allowing the insurance companies to get involved in order to profit off of the system.
And looking at what's happening here, do you see a risk that Britain starts to look at the American model and go in that direction?
Do not look at the American model. Please do not. build on what you have, improve what you have. Healthcare is a human right. That's what it is. And that was established here in, 1948. That was an extraordinary achievement. And I understand your system has problems. Deal with those problems. But don't think that insurance companies and privatizations are going to make the situation better. They will only make it much worse.